Do we finally have the technology to better target and ultimately destroy fluorinated contaminants in water supplies? It seems so, as PFAS continue to make headlines and raise concerns because of the abundance in which these compounds have been detected in drinking water supplies across the United States. Engineers have come up with a way to effectively deal with the growing problem. Here's how we're headed toward a potentially PFAS-free future. First off, what are PFAS? PFAS are widely used, long-lasting chemicals, components in which break down at a staggering rate. They consist of very strong carbon-fluorine bonds, which aren't very easily degradable. They can remain in the environment for almost ever, which is why they're also commonly referred to as forever chemicals. Because of their widespread use and persistence in the environment, many of them are starting to show up in the blood of both humans and animals all over the world. They're even present at low levels in various food products and in the environment. There seems to be no escape. The compounds are found in the air, water, fish, and soil, and studies have proven that the exposure to some of them may be directly linked to adverse health effects in living organisms. Scientists have identified thousands of PFAS chemicals and have discovered that they exist in many different commercial, consumer, and industrial products. As you can imagine, this makes it pretty difficult to study and assess the potential human health and environmental risks that they pose. Perfluorooctanoic acid, PFOA, and perfluorooctane sulfonate, PFOS, are two of the most widely used and studied chemicals in the PFAS group. However, the two of them have been replaced by other PFAS in recent years. How does PFAS get into drinking water supplies? So there are a number of ways PFAS can enter our drinking water. They could be traveling from the ground surface through unsaturated soil zones from a spill or a disposal site. They may also enter groundwater through air deposition, where airborne PFAS travels some distance before it lands and settles on the ground. Over time, it makes it to the groundwater table with rain. The toxic chemicals are also present in landfill leachate. When you look at the lined landfill, leachate is normally discharged to a wastewater treatment plant. The compounds aren't typically removed by conventional treatment methods. What that essentially means is that they remain in biosolids in treated wastewater and eventually leach into groundwater. Finally, treated wastewater is often discharged to surface water reserves, which may serve as drinking water supplies or may even be connected to groundwater supplies. Because they are forever chemicals, they don't degrade. PFAS mass just ends up migrating from one source to another, eventually reporting to water. And voila, that's how it ends up in our systems. What are the effects of exposure to PFAS? Due to their widespread production, use, and ability to move through and persist into the environment, PFAS exposure is inevitable. While most known exposures are relatively low, some can be high, especially when people are exposed to a concentrated source over an extended period. Some PFAS chemicals in particular can accumulate in living organisms over time. Research regarding the effects of different levels of exposure to various PFAS is still ongoing, but what we do know so far is that exposure to these chemicals definitely have some adverse health outcomes. The latest peer-reviewed studies show that exposure to certain levels of these chemicals can lead to reproductive effects like decreased fertility or increased high blood pressure in pregnant females, development delays in children, increased risk of cancer, reduced ability of the body's immune system to fight infections, increased cholesterol levels, and interference with the body's natural hormones. Next up, recognizing the threat in the United States. Recently, researchers from Grand Rapids, Michigan, estimated that more than 200 million Americans in all 50 states could have cancer-causing carcinogens in their drinking water. The toxic chemicals, perfluoroalkyl substances, and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS, are pretty much indestructible. What's scary is that you can't see them, you can't taste them, and you can't smell them. The only way that you're gonna know that they're there is if you test for them. According to the environmental working groups, at least 2,854 locations in 50 states and 2 territories have now been proven to be contaminated with PFAS. The threat has become very real. In Illinois, for example, more than 100 drinking water systems have tested positive for measurable levels of the forever chemicals. Some of the areas that have been infected include the Chicago area, Lake Forest, North Chicago, Waukegan, Crest Hill, and South Elgin. In most cases, the levels are low, but the widespread presence is still a cause for concern. The same thing has been happening in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Indiana, where people are only recently discovering that their drinking water is contaminated with PFAS. The threat has spread internationally as well. Researchers in Toronto, for example, have found disconcertingly high concentrations of these toxic substances, and the surface of seawater near melting ice flows into the Arctic. Researchers from Lancaster University in England have also discovered PFAS up to 2 times higher in the Arctic Barents Sea than levels that have previously been observed in the North Sea. Researchers aim to destroy toxic forever chemicals for good. Earlier this year, engineers from Michigan Technological University developed a new computational tool in the urgent quest to destroy PFAS from community water supplies. Recently, a paper outlining a new PFAS computational tool was published in the Royal Society of Chemistry Journal for Environmental Science. The paper was titled Reactivities of Hydrated Electrons with Organic Compounds in Aqueous Phase Advanced Reduction Processes. A mouthful, yes, but let's examine the study a little further. We'll make it simple. Researchers utilized data science and computational chemistry to study hundreds of structurally diverse organic chemicals to predict the reactivities of PFAS. The same methods were able to expand to include thousands of different PFAS. The main main goal was to understand the reactivities of solvated electrons with organic chemicals and PFAS. The knowledge could then be used to screen many different PFAS chemicals, while prioritizing them for the application of advanced reduction processes to degrade them. This was all part of the research conducted by environmental engineer Dr. Daisuke Minakata and his team. And now let's discuss currently available options to treat water. The most well-understood and studied way to treat PFAS-contaminated water is through the aforementioned method of granular activated carbon (GAC) absorption. This involves the water entering a pressure vessel system consisting of lead and lag vessels filled with GAC. This is where PFAS absorbs within the carbon pores until a certain amount of absorption capacity is used up. The spent GAC is removed, reactivated, or incinerated to destroy PFAS. Ion exchange media absorption is another widely used treatment method. It works through the trading of an inert ion for PFAS. This process is going to cost you a few extra bucks compared to GAC, but is relatively faster. Still, other methods include membrane treatment in the form of nanofiltration and reverse osmosis. While this effectively removes PFAS, it is a lot more expensive and complex. Next, focus of Minakata's research. Minakata studied the oxidation of organic contaminants in water supplies for over 2 decades, reorganizing the uniqueness of each PFAS. His work led to the development of reduction technologies relying on using electrons to improve efficiencies for real-world application. The focus of his research was to target the largest concentration of PFAS. That would be a much better way to effectively, efficiently, and affordably tackle the forever chemicals. The next plan of action would be to carefully examine the physical distribution of PFAS. Minakata said, "We want to go about finding PFAS hotspots, places where we can apply these promising technologies in order to destroy large amounts of PFAS at one time." He and his team understands that PFAS problems can't just be swept under the rug. They need to be tackled and solved in collaboration with communities, industries, policymakers, and scientists. Barriers surrounding PFAS technology. Besides cost, there are a couple of other obstacles standing in the way of PFAS-free water. Local water authorities are finding it difficult to implement available technologies to remove PFAS from water supplies because the technology, such as absorption of granular activated carbon and ion exchange, only offer a phased transfer of PFAS from water to carbon media. These then need to be regenerated and replaced. That's not it. Another concern is that the carbon-based absorption works for longer chain PFAS, but the problem is that these are quickly being replaced by other PFAS, smaller chain ones. The smaller chain PFAS have fewer toxicological concerns, but they can't be removed as efficiently by adsorption. Yet another problem has also arisen. Most of the technology that's available to us at the moment doesn't destroy the PFAS. What it does do is that it simply transfers them from one phase to another. They are implemented in a way that allows them to meet EPA regulations, but that's probably not the smartest move. If the substances aren't being destroyed fully, it's very likely that we're going to be running into bigger problems in the long term. So maybe engineers need to find a way to work smarter, not faster, when it comes to dealing with the problem. Have you had your water supplies tested? How effective do you think this technology is going to be in the long term? And which method do you find most efficient? Let us know all your thoughts in the comments below. If you like this video, be sure to give a thumbs up and subscribe for more. See you next time. Bye!